Have you ever looked at a dollar bill and wondered how this piece of paper, this greenback, came to dominate the entire world? It's not just America's money. It's the currency that powers global trade, the benchmark for international finance. But it wasn't always this way. For centuries, other currencies held this coveted spot. So, how did the US dollar dethrone them all to become the king of currencies? Let's rewind the clock and uncover the epic story of money, power, and the rise of the dollar. Before paper money, trade was well complicated. Imagine trying to trade your chickens for a new pair of shoes. That's barter. It's inefficient. So societies found things with intrinsic value. In ancient China, it was cowrie shells. In Rome, it was salt. In fact, the word salary comes from the Latin salarium, which was the payment Roman soldiers received in salt. For millennia, precious metals like gold and silver were the ultimate form of money. They were durable, divisible, and universally valued. Empires rose and fell on their ability to mine and control these metals. The Spanish Empire, for example, became a global superpower in the 16th and 17th centuries. Largely thanks to the vast amounts of gold and silver it plundered from the Americas. Their silver coin, the piece of 8, became the world's first truly global currency, used from the Americas to Asia. Fast forward to the 19th century. The sun never set on the British Empire, and its currency, the pound sterling, reigned supreme. Backed by the largest gold reserve in the world, held securely in the Bank of England, the pound was as good as gold. If you were trading oil in the Middle East or tea in India, chances are the transaction was priced in pounds. Britain was the world's factory. Its navy controlled the seas, and London was the center of global finance. For decades, the pound sterling was the undisputed global reserve currency. But two devastating world wars would change everything. World War I left Europe in ruins. Nations like Britain and France had borrowed immense sums of money, much of it from the United States, to finance their war efforts. Their economies were shattered, and their gold reserves were depleted. Meanwhile, the United States, which entered the war late, emerged relatively unscathed and economically stronger. It transformed from a debtor nation into the world's largest creditor. American factories were booming, and gold was flowing into its vaults, not out. This was the first major shift of economic power across the Atlantic. The pound was wounded, but it still held on. It was the aftermath of World War II that delivered the final blow. By 1944, with the war nearing its end, the Allied powers knew they needed to rebuild the global economy to prevent another catastrophe. So, representatives from 44 nations gathered in a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. What happened there would define the economic order for the next century. The European nations were economically devastated. Britain was effectively bankrupt. The only country with a strong, intact economy and a massive gold reserve was the United States. At that time, the US held over 2/3 of the world's official gold reserves, so a new system was born, the Bretton Woods Agreement. It was simple but revolutionary. Instead of every currency being tied to gold, all other currencies were pegged to the US dollar at a fixed exchange rate. The US dollar, in turn, was the only currency directly convertible to gold at a rate of $35 per ounce. Essentially, the dollar became the new anchor of the global financial system. The dollar was now, officially, as good as gold. This gave the world a stable system for international trade and investment, with the US at its center. Central banks around the world started holding dollars as their primary reserve asset instead of gold, because it was easier, more liquid, and paid interest. This system worked well for about 25 years. The post-war era saw an unprecedented economic boom, often called the golden age of capitalism, but cracks began to appear. The US was spending heavily on social programs at home and fighting a costly war in Vietnam. It was printing more dollars than it could back with its gold reserves. Other countries, particularly France, grew wary. They started to question if the US could actually honor its promise to redeem dollars for gold. French President Charles de Gaulle famously began demanding gold in exchange for the dollars France held, even sending a warship to New York Harbor to collect it. The pressure became immense. By 1971, the US gold reserves had fallen dramatically. President Richard Nixon was faced with a choice: either implement painful economic policies to defend the dollar or break the link to gold. He chose the latter. On August 15, 1971, what became known as the Nixon shock, he announced to the world that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at a fixed value. The Bretton Woods system was officially dead. Many predicted this would be the end of the dollar's dominance. They were wrong. So what happened? Why did the dollar remain on top, even without its golden anchor? Two key things. First, inertia. The global financial system was already built around the dollar. All the plumbing, the accounting systems, the trading platforms. The international contracts was denominated in dollars. Switching to another currency would have been chaotic and incredibly expensive. Second, and more importantly, came the petrodollar system. In the early 1970s, the US struck a series of agreements with Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer. The deal was this: the US would provide military aid and protection. And in return, Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil sales exclusively in US dollars, because Saudi Arabia was the most influential member of OPEC, the organization of the petroleum exporting countries. The other oil-producing nations soon followed suit. This was a masterstroke. Every country that needed to buy oil, which is basically every country on Earth now, needed to acquire US dollars first. This created a massive, constant, and artificial global demand for the dollar. Even though the dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was now effectively backed by oil, the black gold that powers the modern world. This solidified the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency for decades to come. So, there you have it. The journey of the dollar from a colonial currency to the undisputed king of global finance is a story of war, strategy, and shrewd economic maneuvering. From the ashes of 2 world wars to the Bretton Woods Agreement and the birth of the petrodollar, the US has masterfully positioned its currency at the heart of the global economy. But will it stay there forever? Challenges are emerging from currencies like the euro and China's yuan, and the world of digital currencies is adding a new, unpredictable twist. The history of money shows us that no king reigns forever. The next chapter in this story is still being written. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey through monetary history interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into how our world works. Let us know in the comments what you think the future holds for the dollar. See you next time.